From Anshe Sfard Beth El Emeth Congregation, it's time to take 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to the Anshe Sfard Beth El Emeth Congregation. Welcome to our discussion of Parshat Achrei Mot-Kedoshim. In Parshat Kedoshim, we have the verse which is known as one of the most important verses in the entire Torah. But there is a debate as to really which verse is the key principle in the entire Torah. If we look in the Sifra, the classic Midrash, the halachic Midrash on Vayikra, we find a debate. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, Rabbi Akiva omer, ze klal gadol b'Torah. You should love your neighbor as yourself, says Rabbi Akiva about this verse. This is a major principle in the entire Torah. Ben Azai, one of Rabbi Akiva's friends and colleagues, says, Ze sefer toldot adam, ze klal gadol mizeh. That if you're looking for a great principle, an organizing principle for the entire Torah, this is the book of man. This is the book of humanity. This is a greater principle than that. What exactly is the nature of this debate? It's an interesting discussion. Malbim and others try to define what the debate is. Generally, it's assumed that Rabbi Akiva is a more narrow principle. It's a principle of Jews and the Jewish people in our community, our nation, the people loving your fellow citizens in your own country. Loving your neighbors, loving those who share that social contract within the society in which you find yourself, within the Jewish nation. Ben Azai says there is a more general principle. If you're looking for a principle of guiding human behavior in general, we are part of the book of man, the family tree of entire humanity, descending from Adam, descending from Noah, and in that sense, we are all brothers. We are all part of one great, larger social contract. Perhaps Ben Azai, however, means something else. Ze sefer toldot adam, the end of that verse is B'Tselem Elokim, the notion of the image of God, that it's the image of God which guides us in all of our interactions with our fellow human beings. It's not that we simply share a partnership in the Jewish nation. It's not simply a matter of love. It's a matter of the fact that the human being is endowed with some divine endowment, whether it's the soul, whether it's our capacity to decide, to have free will, whether it's the great capacity of the human being to soar to great heights. This is what should guide us in all of our interactions. That's what it says in the Sifra. However, there is an obscure text which has been questioned as to whether it actually is authentic or not, but it's worth noting, and I'd like to try to expound on what it might mean for us. The Mari ibn Habib, Sephardic author who put together the Ein Yaakov, he writes in his introduction something very strange, and this is what he says. After he brings these two opinions, Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai, he then says, Shimon ben Pazi Omer, different rabbi, says, Matzinu pasuk kolel yoter. We find a verse which is even more all-encompassing than the previous two verses. For who? What is that verse? Where would he find? Where else is a great principle in the Torah? Et hakeves achad taseh v'boker, et hakeves hashani taseh ben arba'im. The first sheep you should do in the morning, and the second sheep you should do in the afternoon. What? A verse talking about sheep? This is the most important principle in the entire Torah? What is he talking about? There's so many different ways of trying to understand what he means. But first we continue with this passage. Amad Rabbi Ploni al Raglav, strange notion that a certain rabbi stood on his feet and he said, Alacha ka ben Pazi. The law follows Ben Pazi, as it says, as it says, the Mishkan, God showed the Mishkan to Moshe. So Ben Pazi, you're right. What does that verse have to do with Ben Pazi? He's talking about the Mishkan, the tabernacle. He's talking about the notion of making sacrifices. What are you talking about? What's going on here? One idea is, and this is alluded to in Rashi on the notion of that you can learn the Torah on one foot, on the principle of what you hate, do not do to your friend. Rashi there says in Shabbat 31a that this principle really only covers the interpersonal laws. Perhaps Ben Pazi says we need a principle for the ritual laws. and that is the notion of worship, the worship of God, and the daily offering in the morning and the afternoon. However, I'd like to suggest something else, entirely different, putting Ben Pazi in the same frame as Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai. What is the daily offering? So at the simple level, the daily offering unites all the Jewish people, because the daily offering is brought from the people of Israel. How do you bring a sacrifice from all of the Jews? Every year, by Nisan 1, the first of Nisan, beginning of the Pesach time, all the Jewish people had to contribute a half shekel. So when you bring that sacrifice is brought on behalf of every single Jew. You know why you should relate to your neighbor as an equal? Because everyone shares that same half shekel, that same portion in the God of Israel, that same portion in the worship of God, that same portion in the daily offerings. And that's what equalizes us all, is the fact that no one contributes more, no one contributes less. We are all equal partners in the daily offerings. That's one way of looking at this third radical, strange opinion. And then I'd like to share another possibility as well. What does the rabbi mean that when, yes, Ben Pazi is right, because after all, it's just like the image of the Mishkan. What does it mean, image of the Mishkan? So here we turn one of the very, very interesting commentators, the Tzror Hamor, Rabbi Abraham Sibag, an exile from Spain and later from Portugal, an escapee from Portugal as well. And he says, let me explain something. He says, Inyana Mishkan, the notion of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and everything in it, is a very deep notion. Gadol v'amok, big and deep. And he says most of the things were mikshachad, most of the objects in the tabernacle were made out of one piece of gold. Lorot al Shem Hashem shu echad, to note the name of God, which is one. Elsewhere in Parshat Vayetze, the Tzror Hamor explains that there are so many verses that tell us that the Mishkan lechaber ta'oel liot echad. You have to put these different little clips on the Mishkan to make it all one. The menorah faces all toward the middle of the candelabra. The menorah is miksha achat, and the whole idea is that the Torah is echad, that all the Jewish people and all of the whole world, it's all echad. It's all one. It's not just that we are all part of one body, that we all have the Tselem Elokim, that we all share in the image of God, that great divine capacity. But not only that, but actually everything is one. And this is the greatest principle, the notion that it's all one. God and all of existence and humanity, it's all one. That's the greatest principle. It's not simply that we love each other. It's not simply that we're part of one community. It's not simply that we're good neighbors to each other. It's not simply that we all descend from one family tree. It's not simply that we share divine capacity, but actually that we are all actually one. As Yerushalmi says in the Darim, if you're cutting something and you cut your finger, the other hand doesn't go and slap the other finger, because all of the body is one. Says Ben Pazi in this very obscure and perhaps questionable source, but nonetheless, someone thought it actually existed. The notion is that we are all one, that we're all part of one existence. These are the very important principles of the Torah. As we pointed out in another webcast, you can't get to this important principle without the rest of the Torah. So in order to be holy, in order to be koshim to you, in order to approach God as we do in Parshat Achrei, we need the entirety of the Torah, because that too is one with the entirety of the Torah, the entirety of the Jewish people, the entirety of creation. We can feel, indeed, that we are one. And as one, we can truly worship God properly. Thank you for joining us for this discussion of Parshat Achrei Mot-Kedoshim. Join us again each week for our discussions and note our previous recordings on these Parshiot. I want to thank Jason Lefkowitz for making today's presentation possible. And you're welcome to join us at asb.org. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.